When I was younger, around 12 or 13, my friends and I used to go bowling quite a bit. There was a bowling alley just down the street from us, and we'd head there on the weekends. It's been closed for years now, but back then, it was really cheap, perfect for a group of teenagers who didn't have much money to spend. One weekend, I went with my friends, Jacob, Josh, and Mikey, to our usual spot. We always went in the evening, probably around 8 p.m. The place was always packed on weekends, and we'd sometimes see the same people. There was this older guy we often noticed, hanging out by himself on the adult side of the alley where they served alcohol. We always stayed on the side where they didn't. The reason we paid attention to him was that he'd occasionally wander down the entire alley, walking past every lane, watching people bowl. Then we'd see him back at his own lane, still all by himself. We ended up giving him the nickname Creeper Bob. By the third time we saw him that night, a lane opened up right next to us. Sure enough, out of nowhere, Bob, or whatever his actual name was, sat down next to us. For the sake of the story, I'll keep calling him Bob. He started setting up his game next to ours, and soon he began trying to talk to us. He'd make comments about our bowling form, and occasionally interrupt our conversation to share random things, like how long he'd been coming to that alley. Eventually, he said something really unsettling, that he had been watching us bowl every weekend from across the alley and decided to come over and introduce himself. He played it off as if he was trying to give us some kind of bowling lesson, but in reality, it was just irritating and uncomfortable. At one point, Bob stepped into our lane while I was getting ready to bowl and grabbed my wrist, trying to position me into what he claimed was a better stance. I never gave him permission to touch me, nor did I ask for any help. We were only 13, and none of us had the guts to tell him to back off. I could feel the discomfort among my friends every second he kept his hands on me, and it made me feel more and more disgusted. We decided to cut our night at the bowling alley short because of him. Instead of spending more money on games, we went to grab pizza at a place further down the block. After eating, Jacob and Mikey headed home since they lived on a different street, while Josh and I walked back toward our neighborhood. As we walked, we heard a car engine start up behind us. When we turned around, we saw an old SUV, maybe a Ford Explorer, making a sharp U-turn. We both instantly thought it might be Creeper Bob. The SUV began following us slowly as we walked down the street, so we picked up the pace. Then, it pulled up alongside us and the window rolled down. Sure enough, it was the man from the bowling alley. He offered us a ride home, but we quickly declined. He then said something about it not being safe for a couple of kids to be walking around at night. We weren't even that young. We were teenagers, not little kids, and it was absurd that he thought he could trick us into getting into his car. After we refused again, he parked his car on the side of the road, and Josh and I took off jogging. We reached an intersection where Josh and I split up, said goodbye, and I continued jogging toward my house. By the time I got home, I was out of breath. Running after eating pizza is definitely not a good idea. My dad was already asleep since he worked weekends, and my mom and sister were both out for the night. I wasn't supposed to ring the doorbell, as my dad didn't want to be woken up, so I went around back to grab the spare key we kept hidden in the shed. As I walked back from the shed, I thought I heard something, and I should have trusted my instincts. I went to unlock the back door, but as soon as I opened it, I felt someone rushing up behind me. Before I could even fully turn around, someone pushed me inside, covering my mouth and wrapping their arm around my neck. I couldn't see who it was since I couldn't turn my head, but I scratched and clawed at his hand until I could move my mouth just enough to scream, "Dad!" Even though I was only 13, I was able to put up enough of a fight that he lost his grip on me a few times, which allowed me to scream. This must have scared him because he finally let go and bolted out of the house. I didn't look back. I ran up the stairs to the main floor, yelling for my dad. My dad rushed out of his room, and after I told him what had happened, he checked the backyard and the rest of the property. When he came back inside, I told him about the man from the bowling alley, how we called him Creeper Bob, how he followed Josh and me in his SUV after admitting to watching us all night at the alley. My dad filed a police report and tried to get the bowling alley to release the security footage from that night, but they refused. After my mom found out about everything, I was never allowed to go back there again. Not that I'd ever want to after that. The craziest part is, I can't say with 100% certainty that the guy who grabbed me was the man from the bowling alley. But really, how likely is it that it wasn't him? When I was a teenager, my close group of friends were what you might call troublemakers. We enjoyed causing a little chaos, breaking rules, and hanging out in places we had no business being. I grew up in a suburb in northern New Jersey, so in hindsight, we were just spoiled kids with nothing better to do. Looking back, the way we spent our time seems a bit ridiculous, but there's no changing it now. One of our favorite activities was exploring late at night. Usually, we wandered around abandoned buildings, though not always. In fact, we got banned from our middle school after sneaking in through an open window once, but that's a story for another time. On this particular night, we had something a little riskier in mind. There were 5 of us. Myself, Chip, Jason, Rowan, and Anish. Rowan was known for bouncing from job to job, which was a running joke in our group. He'd quit jobs as fast as he got them, usually for the most absurd reasons you could imagine. He had recently landed a gig as an attendant at a bowling alley a few towns over. You probably see where this is going. He had been entrusted with the key to lock up the place the night before, and Anish, who had a talent for persuasion, convinced Rowan to let us explore the bowling alley at 3 a.m. Anish could talk anyone into just about anything. Last I heard, he might actually be in jail right now. The 5 of us agreed to get a little tipsy before heading out. We all had a decent amount to drink, except for Jason, who refused to go anywhere unless he was the one driving. His dad had a nice BMW, and Jason liked having the option to end the night when he got tired. After getting buzzed, Jason drove the 5 of us to the bowling alley. I was the heavy drinker of the group, which isn't something I'm proud of, but it's just who I was at the time. Because of that, I often took things less seriously than I should have, especially when it came to risky situations. Rowan unlocked the door and we made our way inside. Chip, usually the most cautious, kept warning us to be careful in his usual high-pitched voice. Rowan told us we couldn't actually bowl right now, which bummed us out a bit. Being drunk, I had the brilliant idea to slide down the lanes like they were slip-and-slides. Surprisingly, it turned out to be pretty fun, and we kept ourselves entertained for a while. Eventually, though, we got bored and asked Rowan if there were any back rooms we could check out. He said there were, and we ventured into the employee-only area, eventually arriving at a storage room. We started goofing around, tipping things over, just acting stupid. We figured Rowan was going to get fired anyway, so we didn't worry about the mess. As we were losing interest, we suddenly heard a loud thud from below us. We all froze, staring at each other. Jason, the only sober one, asked if the place had a basement. Rowan looked as confused as we did and said he didn't know. Anish, of course, grinned, eager to investigate further. Chip, on the other hand, was nervous, warning that Rowan was going to get fired. We were whispering now, debating whether we should look for the basement. Just then, Jason lifted the corner of a rug in the room, revealing a hatch. We were shocked. The mood instantly shifted. It had just gotten real. Even if we found the basement, the source of that noise was still a mystery. None of us really wanted to go down there, but Jason, being the calm one, opened the hatch and revealed an old rusted ladder leading down into the darkness. Chip whispered that he wanted to leave, but Jason ignored him and started down the ladder with his phone's flashlight. Without thinking, I followed him, still riding my liquid courage. Anish was right behind me, and Rowan came last. Chip stayed up top, refusing to join us. The 4 of us explored the dusty basement with our phone flashlights. It was full of old cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling, and at first it seemed like there was nothing down there. Then Anish spotted a door in the corner. Jason approached it, and just as he was about to open it, we heard the same thud from behind the door. We exchanged horrified glances. It couldn't have been an animal. It was too loud. I started backing away, but Jason of course cracked the door open. Inside was another storage room, But there was something else. A figure sitting in the corner with its back to us. We stood frozen, completely terrified. After a full minute, the person in the corner banged their head against the wall, explaining the sound we had heard. We all started tiptoeing toward the ladder, trying not to make any noise. Just then, Rowan tripped on some debris and cursed. The figure in the corner yelled, and we bolted. Jason and I were up the ladder in seconds, with Anish right behind us. Chip, who had been waiting at the top, leaned over the hatch, panicking. Anish made it out, and the three of us ran out of the room. We heard Rowan scream, "Get off me!" But Jason and Anish were too scared to go back. I turned around and saw Chip throwing a metal pipe down the hatch, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Rowan scrambled up the ladder, and Chip grabbed his arm, yanking him up. We all sprinted out of the bowling alley, with Rowan barely locking the door, with shaking hands. Jason drove us back, his face pale. Rowan told us that after we got out, whoever was in the basement had jumped on him, clawing at him. Chip came to his rescue by nailing the guy with a pipe, sending him tumbling backward. Rowan said he only saw the guy for a second, a dirty, old, homeless-looking man with wild hair. Rowan quit the job the next day without telling his boss what happened. To this day, we have no clue how that guy ended up in the basement. Maybe there was another entrance we missed. Either way, the basement had been hidden for a reason, and I wouldn't be surprised if Rowan's boss knew something about it. That experience completely ruined bowling for me. One evening, my girlfriend Rebecca and I thought it would be fun to go bowling. We drove to the nearest bowling alley, rented some shoes, picked out bowling balls, and found ourselves a lane. We were both pretty bad at it, having not bowled in years. We had paid for an hour, but Rebecca wasn't really enjoying herself since most of her throws were landing in the gutter. I was doing a little better, but not by much, so I wasn't much help either. To top things off, Rebecca's ex-boyfriend showed up with his group of friends and started bowling a couple of lanes down from us. Rebecca refused to even glance in that direction, whispering to me that we should leave right away. So, we called it quits early, and she waited in the car while I returned our shoes. I think her ex saw me at the front counter, but I just looked away, not wanting to stir anything up. I didn't mention it to Rebecca. When we got home, we decided that Wii bowling and some wine sounded like a much better plan. Once we got home, I immediately powered up the Wii and cracked open a bottle of wine. The bowling alley trip had been a bit of a flop, but I didn't want Rebecca to feel down about it. We ended up playing Wii bowling for about half an hour with some music in the background while sipping on our wine. It turned out to be way more fun than the actual bowling alley until the song we were listening to ended, and in that brief moment of silence, we both heard a noise from upstairs. We exchanged a look, and Rebecca confirmed that she had heard it too. I switched off the music for good, and the house fell into silence. The sound we heard was like something heavy had dropped onto the floor. I went upstairs to check things out. I flipped on all the lights and looked through every room, even checking under the beds. I didn't find anything. I wasn't expecting to, but you know how it is when you hear a suspicious noise, you just have to investigate. After not finding anything out of place, I wondered what could have made that sound. We resumed our Wii bowling game for a little while longer before bringing our wine party upstairs to the bedroom. After a while, we fell asleep. Rebecca's a bit of a lightweight, so she had drunk more than me, which probably explains why I woke up in the middle of the night, and she didn't. This time, I was woken up by the exact same sound of something heavy hitting the floor, but now we were upstairs, and the sound seemed to come from above us. That's when I realized it must have come from the attic. The attic door is right outside our bedroom. It's one of those with the string you pull down to lower the ladder. I tiptoed out of the room, careful not to wake Rebecca. Standing beneath the attic door, I listened. Every few seconds, I could hear a faint creaking, like something shifting its weight. I didn't want to scare Rebecca, but I'd heard of animals getting into attics before. I grabbed a broom from the closet as a makeshift weapon in case I had to fend off something. I quietly pulled down the attic door and climbed up the ladder. When I reached the top, I paused and listened again. The creaking sound was coming from an old rocking chair we had stored up there. Using my phone as a flashlight, I scanned the attic. That's when I saw it. Someone was sitting in the rocking chair, gently rocking back and forth. My heart nearly stopped. I wanted to run back to Rebecca and hide. I wanted to do anything but confront this person, but I somehow gathered the courage to shout, "Who are you?" The rocking stopped. Slowly, the man turned to face me, and then he made this low, guttural growling noise. That was enough for me. I scrambled down the ladder as fast as I could and slammed the attic door shut. I screamed for Rebecca to call the police, and she quickly acknowledged me. I stood under the attic door, holding it up, as I heard the man trying to kick it open from above. He eventually stopped, but I could still hear his deranged laughter, followed by him muttering in what sounded like Russian. I was trembling, my arms burning from holding up the door, waiting for the police to arrive. When they finally got there, Rebecca let them in and they took over. We stayed downstairs while they went up to investigate. Minutes later, the officers brought the man down in handcuffs, leading him through the living room. I'll never forget the way he looked at me. His eyes were wild, filled with hatred and madness. His lip was curled in such a strange way, almost like he was drunk. We didn't press charges, but I'm sure he was charged criminally, unless they deemed him mentally unstable. This all happened in the summer when we usually kept the windows open. I figure he must have slipped in through one of the back windows. I still don't know why he chose our house. Maybe we were just the unlucky ones.